Okay, here's example 3 with trig identities. So again, if you want a copy of this packet that we're using here, check the video description. You can click that link, open this up, print it out, and follow along if you'd like. So for example 3, what do we see here? 1 plus cotangent squared of negative theta equals cosecant squared of theta. Okay? So our general process that we talked about in the previous video, we're going to use this here. Okay, so always start on one side, try to make it look like the other side, and usually start with the side containing the more complicated expression. So this expression on the left is a little more complicated than this expression on the right. So we'll start on the left-hand side and try and make it look like the right. Okay? So 1 plus cotangent squared of negative theta equals, okay, so eventually we want to end up with cosecant squared of theta. So before we move on, let's look at this and ask ourselves, does this look like anything that we sort of know and recognize? Well, it kind of sort of looks like this Pythagorean identity, cotangent squared of theta plus 1 equals cosecant squared of theta. Okay, but what's different? Well, here the 1 is written first. That doesn't matter at all. Okay, you're just adding two things. It doesn't matter what order you add them in, so that's not really relevant. But what is different is instead of cotangent squared of theta, we have cotangent squared of negative theta. Okay, so what are we going to do with that negative theta? Well, if we have a negative theta instead of a theta, what does that kind of look like? That kind of looks like an even-odd identity type thing. Okay, so let's see if maybe we can somehow use this. So cotangent of negative theta, we know that's negative cotangent of theta. Okay, so we're going to want to use that somehow, but we have a squared on here, so we have to be very careful. Okay, so remember this squared is a shorthand notation. Okay, so let's take, first we're going to rewrite this without the shorthand. So this is the same thing as 1 plus cotangent of negative theta, and then that entire thing squared. Okay, so remember this cotangent squared is just shorthand for this type of thing here. Okay, so now this equals 1 plus, now we have cotangent of negative theta. Okay, and cotangent of negative theta is negative cotangent of theta. So this is negative cotangent of theta. And then we still have this whole thing being squared. Okay, so that's good. Now we got the minus sign out of here because cotangent is an odd function, so we can do that like that with no problem. That's great. Okay, now what else is going on here? Okay, now 1 plus, now we just simplify. Okay, so if you have a negative thing being squared, basically we can drop these brackets and the minus sign goes away, right? So it's just like if you have negative x squared, that's just negative x times negative x, right? Which is the same thing as just x squared, right? So even though we don't have an x, we have a cotangent of theta. Okay, it's a little more complicated than just a plain old x or anything like that, but it's the same exact principle. Okay, the exact same thing applies. It's just a negative thing being squared. Okay, so the minus sign just goes away, and what we're left with is cotangent of theta, and then squared. Okay. So now let's rewrite that with the shorthand notation. So 1 plus cotangent squared of theta. Okay. Now I want to point out, we want to be very careful. Don't write, when we got to this step here, don't write it like this, 1 plus cotangent of theta squared. This is not correct, okay, because if you write it like this, that really means this. And it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing as this, so be very careful about that. Something to watch out for sure. Okay. So now we're at 1 plus cotangent squared of theta, and now right away we can just say, okay, well that equals 1 plus cotangent squared of theta. Again, it doesn't matter what order you add things in. Okay, first plus second or second plus first, whatever, same thing. This exactly is equal to cosecant squared of theta. Okay. So this equals cosecant squared of theta. And that's what we wanted, right? Cosecant squared of theta, so we got there, so check mark, we're good. So that's example 3 with establishing the identity. Okay. So again, what we did is we looked at this and we said, okay, it sort of looks like the Pythagorean identity, but it's a little different because we have the negative theta in here. And the negative theta, maybe that's a clue that we should use even and odd identities, okay, that are listed on this first page here. Okay. And then remember, we had to be very careful with this, so this is just shorthand notation for this type of thing, so we'll write it with the long way, with the brackets and everything, and then simplify that with the even-odd identities, in this case odd, because cotangent is an odd function, and then square something negative, the negative just goes away, it's the exact same thing. So, had that there, rewrite using the shorthand notation, which we don't really have to do that, but why not? Just show all the details here. And then Pythagorean identity, this is exactly equal to cosecant squared, and that's that. Okay, so that's example 3 with trig identities, example 4 coming up next.